have permission to record if you're set up for it.
I am recording.
Great. Wonderful.
There's Andrea in her new sweater.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi there.
I have lots to say to you, but in response to your emails. But
should we stay on the call afterwards, or are you usually ready to lie down after these?
We could do either. I could just answer your emails anyway. Just wanted you to know that yeah, I really appreciate and intend to follow up on this.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's talk.
Yeah. All right. Well, welcome everybody, and it's good to see you. And I will now have a look at the questions here, and we can go ahead and begin. Let's see. Where are they? Oops, not there. There they are. Okay. All right. So, all right, I'm going to begin with the most recent questions, just because that's in the order they're presented on my screen. And hopefully, I'm going to get through everybody's questions. So, first question is from John Bash, concerning the use of alcohol and cannabis and the fifth precept. And you're here, John. Hi. So thank you for your question. Just to read your question, in your view, can consuming alcohol or cannabis be reconciled with the precept discouraging intoxicating substances? I found light or moderate alcohol to allow me to more function comfortably and even effectively in social situations and decrease anxiety, even though it does dull the mind. Yes, well, John, first of all, wouldn't you rather be able to deal with anxiety or even not have the anxiety and feel more comfortable in social situations? I'm sure you would. And without having to use alcohol, I'm sure you would prefer that. You say even though it dulls the mind. Since you're here, let me ask you: are you referring to in the way that you use it? Do you experience the dullness of the mind, or you just mean in principle?
Yeah, I do experience that dullness.
Okay, and I'm not surprised at that answer, because the consumption of alcohol for that purpose usually doesn't get achieved until there's a certain amount of dullness. So what I would suggest is that you try to practice as much mindfulness as you can in those situations, and that you try to wean yourself away from this very convenient and highly socially acceptable way of dealing with anxiety and difficult social situations. Now, first of all, there's a certain amount of alcohol that you can consume. You know, you develop a tolerance to alcohol, and you can get to a place where you can consume a glass of wine or beer over a period of time without it actually producing any discernible degree of dullness. This is widely recognized by law enforcement. That's why there's a certain blood alcohol level that they measure and that's why there are rules like, you know, if you drink one beer or one drink or a glass of wine per hour, you're not considered to be impaired. And I think that this would be noticeable to you. So what I suggest you do is practice mindfulness of the social discomfort when you experience it. If you do choose, then you have a choice then of continuing to be mindful of it and try and accepting of it and trying to work with it, or you may choose to go ahead and have a drink to help ease things. But if you're going to do that, then be mindful of the effects that it's having on you. See if there isn't perhaps a level where you don't experience the dullness. And like I say, see if you can get to the place where you can accept the anxiety and the discomfort you feel in certain social situations without dulling your mind. Okay? But the real answer to this is going to come through the process of meditation that leads to what I refer to as purifications, where you get to the root of what is producing this discomfort in social situations, and you deal with it. It's probably a pretty big thing. It probably has some pretty good deep roots. It may take you a while to deal with that, but the strategy that I suggest is twofold. One is that you keep on meditating and hopefully be able to deal with that as a purification and get over it that way. But in the meantime, you practice mindfulness in those situations, and you also be mindful of the aspects of those situations to the degree that there's dullness of mind. Be mindfulness of the dullness of mind and recognize it as something that you would prefer not to have. If you are actually being mindfulness, you will realize that from time to time you do or say things that you might wish you had done differently afterwards. That's another aspect of the negative aspect of the mind dulling effect of alcohol. So use your mindfulness in both a positive way and in a way of recognizing that this is not the best coping mechanism, and yeah. There's a little. Go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you for that.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. You also mentioned cannabis, and let me say that if you've developed a very high degree of mindfulness, then the effects of both alcohol and cannabis, you can observe them with a high degree of mindfulness. Much the way that you can be quite mindful even though you are ill or tired or something like this. Now, when you're stages 1 through 6, your ability to do that is not going to be very good. But as your metacognitive introspective awareness matures, then you might use those substances and be able to maintain a high level of mindfulness in the face of it. Because it's been highly recommended by several doctors, I have been trying to use cannabis as part of the treatment for stage 4 cancer. I basically just am, to me, the time that I'm under the influence of THC is time that's lost from the richness of living. And so I tend to use it only at night and when I'm sleeping. And they tell me, well, to really get the effects, you need to use it during the day. But I find that sometimes I can explore it with mindfulness. And I know I've had the experience in the past, and maybe some of you are listening, that it seems that that cannabis can open your mind up to ways of seeing things that you weren't aware of before. And it can do this. Although when you reflect on these things afterwards, if you can remember them, sometimes you'll find that they're valuable insights into your personality and the reason that you behave the way you do, and other times you'll find out that they're rather meaningless. So I don't recommend cannabis as a primary means of self-exploration. Other psychedelics, on the other hand, especially when used in a ceremonial context, for example, you might attend an ayahuasca ceremony, or you might attend a Native American church ceremony with where peyote is used, or you might attend a mesa ceremony where San Pedro is used, and you might it might be a nice complement to the self-exploration that's a part of the spiritual path, and might help you to help deepen your understanding of the Dharma. These have been used as a part of the spiritual path for a very, very long time. And I think it's very, very situation dependent. If you'll recall, in the early days of experimentation with LSD, that Ram Dass, Richard Alpert at that time, and the other guy, I can't remember his name. One of the things that they told everybody that was really important was set and setting when using psychedelics. And that is true, and I would say the set and setting that is most consistent with the Buddhist path is the ceremonial setting that's created by somebody who is very skilled and has been trained, trained under a master in the use of these substances. I don't particularly recommend you trying to use these on your own, because then you're just going to have interesting experiences that don't necessarily that aren't necessarily easily integrated into any larger understanding or personal growth, right? So that might be a little bit of an unexpected answer from a meditation teacher, but my experience, both my own and in discussions with other people, I found this to be quite true. So hope that makes sense to those of you who are listening to this. That was really Michael Walsh's question, was about other psychedelics. So, all right, next thing we have here, Damien Foster. Are you here, Damien? Quick scan. Appears not to be. Let's look at the question. Using earplugs during sits is discouraged, yet I'm living in a very loud atmosphere almost continuously. Yes, using earplugs when there is normal ambient noise is strongly discouraged. Those normal ambient noises, birds chirping, dogs barking, kids laughing outside, refrigerators coming on and off, things like that, these can actually be very, very helpful to your meditation. So trying to isolate yourself from sounds using earplugs is not a good idea. However, if you are in a loud atmosphere, then as you described, then the earplugs will be very appropriate. And if it truly is a loud atmosphere, even earplugs are not going to give you that total isolation from sound. And you'll have other sources of extrospective stimulation. I see Adrian has has basically responded to Damien and pointed out that he uses earplugs in exactly this way. He uses them when somebody is playing the piano downstairs, and I assume he doesn't need to the rest of the time. Michael Walsh has another question about creativity and mindfulness. Are you here, Michael? Unfortunate. It's difficult to find a particular time of day that suits everyone to attend, isn't it? Sorry you can't be here, Michael, but I will deal with your question anyway. Mindfulness and creativity are completely compatible, entirely compatible. As a matter of fact, it would greatly increase your creativity, whether you are an artist or, quote, creative in your normal life anyway. It has to be some understanding. You say some scientific studies on creativity have shown that mind wandering is vital to the creative process. They're not talking about the kind of mind wandering that we're talking about in meditation. They're talking about when your mind is not, what they're talking about is when creative and inspirational ideas arise in consciousness when the mind isn't preoccupied with some other task. There are famous instances of this. The organic chemist Koch discovered the structure of the benzene ring. He'd been thinking about this for a long, long time and couldn't figure out how these 6 carbon atoms could be linked together in a way that was consistent with everything that was known about chemistry. And then I believe it was after a Christmas dinner or something like that, he was sitting in a chair in a sort of half awake, half asleep process, and the answer sprang into his mind. He had a vision of 6 monkeys chasing, each holding the tail of the other, running in a circle. And he understood the structure of the benzene ring from that. And there's a lot of incidents like that. A lot of people's creativity happens at unexpected times. But if you develop mindfulness, you're increasing the you're increasing the power of your awareness and your introspective awareness in particular. Creative ideas come from the parallel processing of large parts of your mind that are, particularly when they're not entrained in the process that's associated with problem solving, reductionistic and analytical kinds of activities, which involves parts of the brain that are quite different than the parts that are the sources of novel ideas. The parts are basically in the brain. There's a lot of fluidity. Concepts aren't rigidly categorized. Ideas and things have a fluidity and can shift from one to another, which, by the way, is one of the things that we do see with the use of psychedelic substances. As you develop mindfulness, you have much greater, your conscious experience has much greater access to this kind of parallel processing that gives rise to creative inspiration. And what I've seen and what I've heard from people who are professional creatives, that their mindfulness practice, their meditation practice that has increased their mindfulness, increases their creativity. There's different kinds of creativity. Architects and engineers have a kind of creativity that is very much related to linear thinking and analytical thinking, and they produce a lot of successful but relatively mediocre and not terribly novel solutions to engineering and architectural problems. On the other hand, there are those engineers and architects who really stand out, who produce something really novel and really aesthetically valuable and functionally effective and structurally sound at the same time. These brilliant ones, they're the ones that are true creatives, and they have learned to tap into that parallel processing of the many parts of the mind that take place outside of the conscious process of focusing my attention. I have this problem to solve. How do I get from A to B? And they explore various linear tracks to reach there. So there's different kinds of creativity, but mindfulness will actually help both, but it is particularly valuable in that that form of creativity that depends on novel thinking, on novel solutions to problems. So sorry you couldn't be here, but I hope that that's a helpful answer. Boris, are you here?
Yes, Culadasa.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. So good. Let's look at your question here. Yes, you have some doubts about introspective awareness, right? You're able to do stage 5 and 6 techniques. And so from that, you have concluded, and of course we would conclude looking at that well, you must have introspective awareness, and for stage 6, you must have that introspective awareness must have a metacognitive component to it in order for it to be successful. That's what we would assume. Yet you say that you are not aware of the functioning of your awareness. You don't see what happens in the background. And so there's two possibilities. One is that you have an expectation of what awareness is like that is preventing you from identifying awareness, even though you're experiencing it. And you do make the statement that when my mental energy level begins to decrease, my awareness gives an order to correct for it. Well, how do you know that happens? The other possibility is that you've somehow trained yourself to achieve the goals without really having developed awareness to its full potential. And I'm going to go on the assumption that that may be the case. And what I'm going to suggest is that you reread the first interlude on attention awareness very carefully so that you're really clear on what to expect. And then you spend time doing the 4-step transition to the meditation object. Is that something that you have been doing? Do you do that 4-step transition? It's described for stage 1?
I enjoy doing it. I think
okay.
I get the expected results. So gradually transition from the very broad focus toward the nose.
Yeah. And so when you're doing that practice, is the difference between awareness and attention clear when you're doing that practice? Yeah.
I think, yes, it is. What my doubt is, for example, I'm following the dedicated practitioner course right now. And one of the teacher, Blake, told about metacognitive or even introspective awareness, simple introspective, as a field. So yes. I'm expecting to perceive some, like I have a field of attention that is like before me. I'm expecting to have another field clearly perceived, like behind me, where I have a moment by moment awareness of different mental objects like thoughts or sounds, something that is continuous and well perceived. But actually, it's not what is happening. I have just like some moments of peripheral awareness, and other moments there is I don't perceive it like continuously.
Mhm.
So I'm sure I have peripheral awareness, but
Right.
I don't know if I have the quality of metacognitive introspective awareness. That is
Mhm.
something more powerful, more continuous, and more sharply perceived.
Well, that is exactly what metacognitive introspective awareness is. Um, you, yeah. When we speak of the field of conscious awareness, maybe a couple of important things to note just to begin with is that anything that you pay attention to has first appeared in your peripheral awareness. So if a thought arises and attention goes to it, you first became conscious of that thought in peripheral awareness. Same thing with sound and so on and so forth. And essentially what we're learning to do as we're proceeding through these stages is to keep attention from going to those thoughts and sounds and whatever else in the background that is arising. As we learn to do this, going through the stages, yes, you become aware of there's a whole field of things that are going on simultaneously. I mean, have you sat and focused on some particular task? And I recently posted it as no, it might have been a private correspondence with somebody. But you're sitting and you're reading your email and you're answering your email, but at the same time you're aware of your environment, things going on in your environment, and occasionally you may pay attention to one of those, but mostly you just know they're there, and you know that they're there. If you do pay attention to them, you know that they're there before you paid attention to them, and when you bring your attention back to the task at hand, you continue to be aware of them. So examples that I would use is that you're working on your email and there's a sound of the refrigerator motor comes on and off in the next room. You're aware of the dog sleeping in the corner. The neighbor's dog barks occasionally, but you're so used to it that you don't direct your attention to it when it happens. Okay. And then say your neighbor starts up his lawnmower in a part in his backyard where you can't hear it, but as he's running his mower back and forth, he comes closer to your house or your apartment or wherever it is you're living, and you become aware of the sound in the background. At some point, it may become loud enough that you direct your attention to it, and attention does its job. It says, that is the lawnmower belonging to my neighbor, and it's not important, and you go back to focusing on your email. But you were aware of it beforehand, and you're aware of it afterwards. Now, what could be happening here is that you actually, everyone has awareness. It's just a question of developing it. And developing it, usually the different aspects of developing it take care of themselves, and it's not necessary to go into them in detail. But a really big part of it, knowing that you're conscious at all, no matter whether it's attention or awareness, is your ability to recollect it a moment later, 5 minutes later, so on and so forth. There's a lot of content in awareness, and so it doesn't remain in memory for all that long, unless there are particular things in your awareness. And if you direct your attention to something in awareness, then you're much more likely to remember it a few moments later, or even a long time later. There can be certain things that arise in awareness that a sound triggers a thought triggers emotion. It becomes a big deal. You may succeed in not paying attention to it, but you'll remember that it happened. But most of the contents of awareness are not, they're not incorporated into the story of my life as it's unfolding right now, because there's too much information for it to. So it may be that you're being aware, but you're not, it's not registering strongly enough in your short-term memory for you to know that you're aware moment by moment. And the interesting thing about, I'm speaking of awareness, but this is true of consciousness as a whole. Susan Blackmore teaches consciousness studies, and one of the exercises she has her students do in classes, ask themselves periodically during the day, am I conscious now? And after a while, I start coming back with the answer, well, no, I wasn't. Well, it wasn't that they weren't conscious. It was that they don't have any recollection of having been conscious. I mean, somebody ever said a penny for your thoughts, and the instant they said it, you can't, for the life of you, remember what you were. You know you were thinking about something, but you can't remember what it was. So one aspect of awareness, and it's an important one, and it needs to be developed, is knowing in the moment that you're awareness and that you're aware, and knowing on an ongoing basis. Because this is an important part of peripheral awareness. Peripheral awareness can still serve the purpose of letting you know that you're about to lose attention to a gross distraction, without, and what consciously registers is that, a subtle distraction became a gross distraction. My mind noticed it and corrected for it, but you didn't notice all the other stuff that was going on around it. So with these thoughts in mind, continue, as you say you're already doing this, continue to hold in mind the intention to be aware moment to moment. So while your attention is stably fixed on the breath, you should be able to have awareness both of external sounds and bodily sensations, as well as thoughts and emotions and things like that come and go, shifts in your mental state that they're taking place even while your attention is focused. And as I say, that four-step transition, that's really what you're doing. In order to make that even more clear, the distinction between awareness and attention is that sometimes you deliberately move attention, and sometimes you just observe the spontaneous movements of attention. But you're always trying to sustain awareness. And this would be awareness that you're conscious of and that you know. It won't last so long that by the time you're in the third step, you will remember particulars of what you had been aware of in the first step. And that's all right. But you want to remember it long enough in the sequence that it becomes incorporated into your ongoing experience, because metacognitive introspective awareness is going to show you very, very clearly how your mind works, how your mind reacts to various things. But if you don't have access to that information after it's been generated, then you don't get the benefit of it. Okay, so I hope this helps. Yeah.
Yes,
and good luck with it. Yes.
Thank you, Culadasa.
You're most welcome. Flo. Not sure Flo is here. I don't see Flo. All right. Let's go ahead and have a quick look. What is my opinion of mixing or alternating between different insight practices? is it better to pick one and stick with it, or is it okay to do several ones at the same time? First of all, I'd like to make a distinction between practices as a system of practice that gets labeled insight, and practices that you can do that are likely to generate insight, but we're not talking about something like practicing the Mahasi method or doing 10 days or a month of Goenka practice as insight practice. So what I'm talking about here, if you look at stage 7 on, the practices that I offer you to help to assist in the development of shamatha, these are actually all insight practices at the same time. And they're very likely to give rise to insight. So if you were just following the 10 stages, you would find yourself doing different insight practices. Now, as for alternating between these different practices, yes, particularly if you find a practice is tending to be very productive for you, either in terms of the development of samatha or in terms of producing insight experiences which could mature into true insight. Yes, there's nothing wrong with alternating between them. At this, when you're at the stage of being an adept meditator, for an adept meditator, you know better than any teacher.
I get there before he starts, just to say hello.
I'm hearing somebody talking in the background. And an adept meditator is at the stage of learning so much about their own mind, and they have the sensitivity to recognize a practice that is productive in these ways, and or a combination of practices. A practice that is very productive for a while might cease to be at some point, or one that was one that wasn't very productive may turn out to be later on. So by all means, experiment with different insight practices in this sense. But if you're talking about switching between doing Mahasi practice in a very strict manner, or Goenka practice in a very strict manner, or even Shinzen's practice in a very strict manner, I'm less certain that you are going to benefit from doing one day and doing the other the next. But you seem to be talking about within the same sit, and certainly I wouldn't switch these practices within the same sit, except in the context of the way they're described in The Mind Illuminated. Close following is, and in stage 8, choiceless attention, are both variants on a Mahasi noting practice. And to switch between those kinds of practices, even within the same sit, I do think is valuable, and if you're an adept meditator, it's appropriate. If you're still between stages 1 and 6, you're better off to focus on developing skills, and those practices are all primarily designed to develop stability of attention and powerful metacognitive introspective awareness, doing it by stages and following a natural development. And these are the things, these are the mental faculties that are going to allow you to achieve insight. Not that you might not experience insight while you're in those early stages. It's not uncommon for people to do so. But during those early stages, make it your primary intention to develop these faculties, then the insights are going to come. They're going to come quickly and they're going to come easily, because you have the mental faculties that will allow you to turn insight experiences into true insight, temporary altered states into permanent traits, things like that, which is what the practice is all about. So, Flo, you're not here to tell me whether that was an adequate response or not, but I hope it was, and you can let me know subsequently. Thomas Patrick Bernardes. You know, I think I might, Nick, can you make a note of the questions that I'm skipping? But I'd like to answer the questions of people that are here first and then come back to those that aren't here. So, Adrian, are you here?
Yes.
Oh, good, wonderful, because I wanted to answer your question. You said that everything is mind-generated, which is the truth that you realize with emptiness. In TMI at the beginning, it is said that we get a direct experience of ultimate truth. What is ultimate truth? Yeah. If everything we can experience is empty, how can we experience ultimate truth? What can we do to get to this experience? Well, okay. Ultimate truth is knowing that you don't know. If I said that in the introduction, people might not read further. But ultimately, yes, when you realize emptiness, then you realize that the only thing that ever happens in consciousness that is not mental construct is some form of cessation. When there are no mental constructs and you have a cessation experience, that and you happen to be conscious of it. I mean, a lot of it, with certain practices, it tends to take the form of just a gap, an interruption in the flow of consciousness, or the perceived flow of consciousness. But sometimes there's the experience of this having been a, what we call a consciousness without an object, or a pure conscious experience with it when a cessation event occurs. But cessation event is the only time the contents of consciousness are are not mental constructs. And even, say, the cessation of craving, okay? The only part of your conscious experience that is not a mental construct is the absence of craving, So on the other hand, say ultimate truth is knowing that you don't know is not quite as glib and simplistic as it sounds. We can know a lot about ultimate reality, let's say, by inference, and we do that. We learn that everything is interconnected and interpenetrating, and we know that is, even though that is a mental construct, we know it's a mental construct that's a closer description to whatever the ultimate truth of reality is. Likewise, impermanence, recognizing that everything is process and experiencing it as process. So you have this non-separateness, and you have the fact that everything is process, and that everything to which we attribute thingness, its very thingness is a mental construct that is being projected onto process in order to make it comprehensible for us. Realizing the truth of this is insight into emptiness, and where it has its greatest value is when you realize that the concept of self and the feeling of self, both of which we cling to so tightly, are mental constructs, that they're not reflections of some reality, of some self that you have and that can be lost. that is born and that can die, that there is no such thing. What there is there is this total interconnectedness. There is this process of which you are a part and your parts are a part and everything else, and none of it is distinct from anything else. It's your mind, and I'm sure another organism's mind, and maybe somebody from Alpha Centauri's mind or something like that, would organize their perception of this interconnected reality in a completely different way, but it would still be empty. It would still be a mental construct. But by inference, we come to understand these things. We come to understand that our suffering comes from treating these things as though they were reality. And so when we're talking about, when you realize ultimate truth, what is the ultimate truth that you realized? It is that it is that the consensual reality that we live in is a mind-created illusion, that there is a much greater reality, that you don't fall into the trap of solipsism and say, well, I'm just dreaming this whole thing. I must be Brahma. You know, I'm Brahma laying here dreaming this whole reality, including myself. Well, that's not going to do you much good. But realizing that that the only thing that your mind can assimilate and work with are the fabrications that it generates from whatever it is that is going on in this larger reality. And you allow that to happen without believing in it, and you are liberated from the suffering that comes from believing that that's true, and you cease to inflict the suffering on others that comes from believing that those misperceptions are true. So that is the ultimate truth that you realize. And even the part about when you realize that you the more you know you don't know. You know, picture it this way: you've got this vast expanse of what is, and there's a little circle that represents what you know about it. So the more you know, and the circumference of the circle, that's the interface between what you know and what you don't know. So the more you know, the bigger the circle becomes, and so does the circumference of the circle, and so does your knowledge of what you don't know. So the more you know you don't know. What's wonderful about that, when it comes as a deep spiritual realization in the form of insight and awakening, is that it's a glorious, wonderful mystery that you are a part of. And it produces a state of awe. And you can live in that state of awe, no longer clinging to the idea that you are somehow going to be able to grasp this. Its very ungraspability becomes part of what sustains you in an equanimous and noble state of being. You know, excuse me, referring to the metaphor of the noble to the Aryan. The Buddha used it, but it is a very noble state of being that you dwell in, imbued with equanimity and largely freed from suffering. So that's the ultimate truth we're trying to reach. So does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. It's a terminology, knowing ultimate truth or understanding ultimate reality, that is used very commonly, and it's either used apophatically, like what is ultimate truth? It's knowing that you don't know, or it's used by people who don't know what it is, but they cling to the idea. I used to, the reason I got into all of this, the reason I went into science, and the reason that I went into spiritual practices and ultimately Buddhism was I wanted to know everything there was to know about everything. I wanted to know, I wanted to understand everything. I wanted to have God's eye view of reality. And at first it was disappointing to realize that that was never going to happen. Almost made life seem pointless. But then it shifted and it became wonderful. Okay, so there's no end to what I can discover. And so far, that is the truth. There's no end to my explorations, my seeking, my explorations. They always bring me back to being what I am, a human being in this world, with the limitations of a human being, but knowing the place for the first time happens over and over again. You might recognize my play on Little Gidding, a quote from Little Gidding. All right. Dominic.
Hello, Culadasa.
Hello, Dominic. Good to have you here. You say my close friend with, yes?
Could I interject for a minute? It might be nice if you turned the gain on your microphone down a little bit because it's clipping.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can do that without creating a lot of problems here.
You shouldn't need to touch your microphone. It's actually, if you go to your screen, or that's probably not the microphone gain.
Okay, that seems to be just the volume of the of the earphones.
If you go see the little mute button, there's a little up arrow to the right of it, and if you click on audio options, I believe. Yeah.
Mute button, and to the right, audio options.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then test computer. Yeah, test computer, mic, and speakers.
Well, it just takes me to a built-in microphone. Sorry.
Yeah, so if you, it should bring up a preference that allows you to turn down the volume on the microphone. And that would be like towards the bottom. And it may be grayed out because it's got automatically adjust microphone settings clicked. Are you seeing that? It should.
I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing select a microphone, built-in microphone.
Yeah, actually, an easier way to get to this is just to go to zoom.us and then click on preferences.
Sorry, to go to what?
Up in the upper left, it'll say zoom.us, and below that it says preferences.
Okay. Maybe I'm not seeing.
The clipping is not so bad.
Problem is we save this audio for forever, and it would be really nice to have the audio quality be as good as possible. But,
yes, it would. I'm not seeing the Zoom US.
So here, let me just quickly share my screen with you, so you can see. 1 second. Hoping this will actually work. So if you go to, if you go to zoom.us, you'll see preferences. Do you see that?
What thing is a map?
Yeah, but in the upper left, do you see what's in the upper left, or is that not showing up?
Oh yeah, Zoom. Okay, yes, a drop-down menu.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that preferences thing should pull up a little window here, and you may have to choose audio from the window.
Okay, so I know where to go. Okay.
Yeah, and then here's the microphone settings.
Yeah, well, I recognize the screen. I've seen it, gotten to it by completely different means, but all right. All right. Zoom.us preferences. Okay. And built-in microphone volume is, ooh, it's at the top. So how's this? I brought it down about 3/4.
It's better.
Is that better? A little more? How's that?
Well, you don't make it too quiet, but yeah, I don't.
Is it good right now? Let's doing a test right now. And is that too soft? Raise it a little?
I think that's good.
Okay. I'll just keep it there then. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And
Sorry to interrupt.
yeah, thanks for the patience of the rest of you. Okay, so we were with Dominic, and my close friend with no meditation experience has depersonalization, derealization symptoms. He currently undergoes cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm aware that such problems might also occur as a side effect of meditation, aka dark night. Would it be wise for him to practice some form of meditation that are recommended as antidotes for dark night, example metta? Or would it be irresponsible to give him any meditation-related advice as he is already under specialist care? Obviously, I do not want to make him worse, but based on the description of his symptoms, I suspect he might be in a way closer than me to realize insights like no self or emptiness. So not pursuing this direction could also be a great opportunity for awakening. Depersonalization, derealization, these are most definitely not the same thing, even remotely, as the experience of no self. I don't know a lot about them other than the fact that I was physically abused as a child, and I learned to dissociate during those periods of abuse. And that too is totally different than depersonalization. So in answer to your question, I think that you really need to have a fairly healthy, reasonably healthy ego structure in order to realize that it is an illusion, and to realize that it is a functional construct that you need to be able to use, just like you need to be able to wear shoes, or well, maybe that's not a good example. You could go barefoot, but your ego construct is something that is very useful and necessary. And what we're really talking about with the realization of no self is realizing its complete illusoriness, and realizing that even the experience of separateness is illusion. Hence the insight into the interconnectedness of everything, the emptiness of formations, that there are no things, only process, only change. These all come together. You can't have a realization of no self until you have these other insights, which is a whole different topic that we could possibly get into some other time. But what your friend is experiencing is it's a kind of pathology, and I think should rely on his therapist to deal with these things. I think for example, doing the mind illuminated practices, certainly without the intention of having some kind of insight into emptiness, would be very valuable. Metta practice would be very, very valuable. But you say perhaps you should definitely encourage this person to keep working very closely with a therapist, and hope that hope that he has good or she has good luck in the near future in working through this. And really, it could actually happen in meditation, but it's more likely either to happen as a result of therapy, even if it does happen in meditation, to happen as a result of the cognitive behavioral therapy that the person is doing. So there's really nothing wrong with learning to develop stable attention and metacognitive introspective awareness. That's not going to be a problem. And metta practice is a wonderful idea. Yes, that would be very good. The dark night is a pathological condition that arises in people who achieve insight, but they're not really prepared for it. And we don't want to confuse that with the so-called dukkha jnanas, or knowledges of suffering, which occur to some greater or lesser degree, regardless of how well the mind is prepared for it, because you're basically giving up the fundamental axioms on which you've based all of your perception and behavior in the past and replacing them with new ones, and that's not comfortable. So you experience the dukkha jnanas, or the knowledges of suffering, which can be summed up as the period of time prior to realizing the insight into no self, during which you are realizing all of these other insights. And that's a pretty desperate position to be in, to still believe in your individual separate selfhood, but be helpless in this world of interconnectedness, process, emptiness, and that you don't even really know what's going on. You're just making up stories. Actually, that by itself is an insight that a lot of therapy helps people to realize, is that what they're taking to be reality is just stories they make up. But if you're still attached to being a self and you need your stories to identify who that self is, giving that up is uncomfortable. That's what the dukkha jnanas are about. The dark night is when you arrive at that place and you are otherwise unprepared. You haven't worked through the various neurotic sources of clinging, and it's not the same thing. You would not want a person who is experiencing depersonalization to encounter that insight, because then they're going to go into, then they're going to have a dark night experience for sure. All of the fears of loss of self associated with the sense of dying and things like that are going to come to the surface. What do you think, Dominic? Does that make sense to you?
Culadasa, thank you for your wisdom. I just wanted to ask a little question regarding that you said that not only metta, but also the, let's say, standard TMI meditation should not make harm. So, for example, getting to stage 4, which is not, I think, very advanced. I am currently at stage 4, I think, and I am not very experienced. I have not yet encountered purification, but I expect it can happen. So such a purification process, you think it does not have potential to be harmful for a person with those problems? Because frankly, he was the one who encountered me about meditation, and I was very cautious about encouraging him to do this because of the correlation I thought might be there.
Yes, that is something that is really quite important to be aware of, is that the purification that take place as a result of meditation and happen predominantly in stage 4 they also involve things that happen in daily life. It's described in the interlude on the magic of mindfulness. But stage 4 can bring things up. And the thing is that meditation is an adequate tool to deal with those things, so long as a person can remain mindful. By that, I mean they don't forget who they are now, where they are now. You know, here I am sitting in a comfortable room, safe and on a meditation cushion, and these things are arising in my mind. In a state of mindfulness, one can deal with a lot of things. But if one is overwhelmed by memories and emotions and things like that when something comes up, then meditation is not the suitable venue for dealing with those things. And yes, you should certainly advise this person of that, that anytime something comes up and they feel overwhelmed by it, they should back away. They can reapproach it later on. But if they find that every time it comes up, they're overwhelmed by it, and then they should be dealing with it with the assistance of a highly trained therapist. Meditation is not, despite it's being so, a narrow sliver of meditation called mindfulness-based interventions is being used very widely in a therapeutic manner. It was never intended for that purpose. It's a necessary part of our personal spiritual growth leading to awakening to deal with a lot of our personal neurosis. And meditation does a good job of that with sort of the average, common, everyday, run-of-the-mill neurosis that most people have. But there are things that meditation, and so, that has to come up and it has to be dealt with in meditation. And if it isn't, of course, that's one of the things that will give rise to the dark night. If all of this stuff hasn't been resolved prior to insight, it will all come at once, up at once, and that's not a good thing. But the key difference between achieving a purification in meditation and making a problem worse is if it arises and the person becomes overwhelmed by it. They're overwhelmed by the emotions or associated memories or associated experiences or that even though they may not be in the form of memories. If they become overwhelmed by it and can't maintain an objective relationship to it, in other words, if they can't be mindful, pay attention to it and not lose the context of who and what and where they are right now, then they need to back away from it. And if that's persistently the case, they need therapy. So this is the advice that you should be giving to this person that's doing this.
Thank you very much. It was very helpful.
You're welcome. Kevin Smith, you here? No. Kevin Hing.
Yes, hello.
Hi, Kevin.
Hey.
Hey. So, are you familiar with the writings of Bernadette Roberts? Yes, I am. And if so, can you explain the extent to which the progress of your journey of insight into and beyond no self correlates to the stages of TMI? Her dark night experiences appear to have been excruciatingly painful, disorienting, and to have occurred over an extended period of time. Yes. I'm still reading, but so far I have not seen her describe any of the purification samatha experiences that you have described and incorporated into TMI. Would you characterize her experience as an extreme example of dry insight? And can you provide some explanation, reassurance regarding the extent to which the severity and disorientation of her insight experiences can be minimized by following TMI? Yes, I am familiar with that. Very fascinated by that. It has very close correlates to the processes of progressive insight and ultimately awakening, the experience of no self. And as a matter of fact, it's an outstanding modern example of what I believe to be the case with all of these spiritual practices, that the true spiritual component of any religious system, mystical Christianity is the category that this would fall into, are ultimately leading to the same place. And this is a reasonable assumption if you consider that all human minds are very similar, in spite of the huge differences that we're aware of as human beings interacting with each other. There's far more similarity from one human mind to another than there are differences. And that whatever this unknowable ultimate reality is, that we come to know by inference, it's the same for everyone. So it makes sense that that spiritual traditions of all kinds, by whatever means and whatever set of constructs they use, are heading the same place. And that's one of the reasons that I enjoyed going through all of Bernadette Roberts' writings. And she made some videos. I don't know if they're still available. They were at one time, and I believe I have them saved. I just don't know where. But I found that very interesting. She followed the path very similar to John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila. And that's because a Christian mystical path and it involves a very different worldview than the Buddhist mystical path does. And the most painful part of it is where Bernadette Roberts and John of the Cross both described this as feeling as though that they had known God, they had felt God, that God was within them, and now God seemed to they lost that. And this is an extreme form of the dukkha jnanas. What had to happen was a complete reorganization of how they understood themselves, and it was couched not in terms of their relationship between themselves and everything else the way that we do in Buddhism, but the primary focus was on the relationship between the self and God. And so the content of the dukkha jnanas that they experienced took a different form, but it was the same process going on. That yes, when I won't go into. I won't try to. I could go on and on for a long time, and I'll try not to on that particular topic. Now, I would agree that the dark night of the soul of both John of the Cross and Bernadette Roberts has something in common with what is being now, what is happening very widely with Western practitioners, and is being documented by Willoughby Britton and now a few other people. It has a lot in common with that, in that their practices didn't provide the opportunity for purifications to take place, and that this needed to take place before they could achieve the degree of maturation of insight that leads to the culmination of the process. the advantage of something like TMI is that, TMI will have to be adapted to fit somebody who is following a Christian mystical path or an Islamic Sufi mystical path or something like that, because it's based in the worldview that is common to Buddhism, not the worldview of a theistic religion. But it can be done, and as a matter of fact, I've been working with, and will have somebody staying for a month and a half who's a long-term practitioner of contemplative prayer, and her teacher in the contemplative prayer practice, her pastor, is very interested in this as well, in the finding the ways that the 10 stages of TMI can be assimilated into the contemplative prayer practice. So back to your question of Bernadette Roberts. Yes, she did have what we would call legitimately a dark night experience, which is what happens when one hasn't had the kind of preparation that is provided, that we try to build into TMI in the description of the 10 stages. The attachment to self, we try to begin to loosen the attachment to self from the instructions from stage 2 onwards in many different ways over and over again. And we try to prepare the practitioner in a variety of ways for the other insights to arise and be easily assimilated. So you asked, would you characterize her experience as an extreme example of dry insight? And can you provide some explanation? Well, let me first deal with that. I wouldn't consider it an extreme example. An extreme example are the kinds of things that Willoughby Britton is writing about. The result in people losing their families and careers, and perhaps spending months or years in a psychiatric hospital. Those are the extreme examples. Bernadette Roberts was a fairly mild example of a dark night, in which it was excruciatingly painful, as you say, but she was still able to function, and she didn't sink into the depths of despair and nihilism and things like that. Although I think she came close at moments. So no, she's not an extreme example. She's a moderate example of the dark night. Regarding the extent to which the severity and disorientation of her insight experiences can be minimized by following TMI, I think I already answered that. I feel like the whole idea behind TMI is to prepare the mind in a whole variety of ways to make the transition to insight and awakening as easy as possible, and to minimize exactly those kinds of problems. Of course, it all depends on what stage in the practice of TMI that insight arises. If it arises prior to stage 6, then there won't be the same degree of preparation of the mind. If it arises stage 7, well, it can still be a bit rocky. But the further along in the process, the more the so-called dukkha jnanas become a very short-term experience during which people don't really lose mindfulness. They may experience some of the same physical symptoms and difficulty with meditation that is described in the progress of insight, dealing with the knowledge of suffering, the dukkha jnanas. But it will become a much smoother and easier transition. As a matter of fact, with the proper preparation, this can happen even without the person knowing it, without having some notable experience of path attainment and fruition. So I hope that answered your question, Kevin.
Yes, thanks. I think the only other slight question I had, I was wondering when you were reading her accounts, whether there was any sense that you had, whether there was how much of what she was describing was the necessary part of that transition, and how much of it was a result of the confusion that she had because she had absolutely nothing to guide her or to go on. She writes extensively that she went to the library. There was, other than John of the Cross, there was nothing else for her, anything like TMI to help her know what to experience. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean,
yes, right. Yeah, well, I think that was a major part of it. Now, in one of her books, she does describe discovering Buddhist teachings and finding them at least somewhat helpful in that she could recognize that what she was experiencing wasn't unique to herself, and it helped her to understand it a little bit. But yeah, I would say most of it was due to the fact that she didn't have any guidance. She really didn't have the kind of preparation that that she needed. And really, you know, when Willoughby Britton asked the Dalai Lama at one of the Mind and Life conferences why the Westerners were having all these, what she called adverse effects of meditation, the Dalai Lama's answer is that meditation is only one part of the Eightfold Path. You know, there is an Eightfold Path, and the practicing the path as a whole is really the proper approach, not just doing meditation by itself. The path of Christianity does provide a lot of the same things that the Eightfold Path does. I don't think it provides anything near the level of clarity and systematic development that the Buddhist Dharma provides to help somebody make sense of the things that they're going through. So, yes, the isolation that she experienced and not having anybody else except you know, what she found at the library to go by must have been a really rough time. You know, just really empathize with that.
Yes. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Is Samuel here?
Right here.
Oh, great. Okay. Is intent part of the ego self, or is it something ingrained deep within consciousness, like peripheral awareness? It feels like intent is part of the ego self as we have direct control over it. Okay. Intent is something that is far more deeply ingrained than even peripheral awareness. In the simplest nervous systems that exist, they are manifesting intention. Now, conscious intention is, of course, not something that a jellyfish experiences. And, you know, there are very simple levels of circuitry in your brain that manifest intention that are far too simple to have anything that even vaguely resembles the kind of subjective conscious experience that we do. But what we do is we incorporate intention when we're constructing the ego self. We incorporate intention into that, and it's absolutely essential. To see yourself as a self means that essentially there is an observer and there is an agency. There's observation and agency. And agency assumes intention. And so in the creation of an ego self, we take all of the various intentions that manifest consciously to some degree or another, and we incorporate them into the ego structure. And we have the illusion that we have direct control over intention. What happens is that we watch the different parts of our mind with different intentions work their way through a situation to where a single intention, at least in the best of cases, where a single intention becomes resolved as in the mental construct as my intention is such and such. Now, in a lot of cases, we will discover that there are still some conflicting intentions involved. We make a decision, we act on it, and then subsequently we experience doubt, uncertainty, maybe we should have done something else. But these intentions, like I say, they exist at a very simple level, far before there's consciousness, and so therefore are more deeply ingrained than even peripheral awareness, because peripheral awareness is a manifestation of consciousness. But intention does arise into consciousness, and it gets incorporated into the idea of the ego self. So you go on, Samuel, to say, if intent is part of our ego, then it seems like throughout our practice we are using our ego to cultivate certain mental traits, stable attention and mindfulness, and then ultimately achieve the dissolution of it. Now, it's true that in the beginning we feel like it is ourself as an agent that is generating the intention. But that is really similar to the illusion that I just described. What we are seeing is that the experiences that we've had, the things that we've read, the teachings we've heard, the people we've associated with, and the ideas we've exchanged with them have all contributed to creating a predisposition in us to certain activities. And if you are a meditator, your intention to meditate, and then if you're reading TMI, then the TMI has directed this intention to more particular intentions of cultivating stable attention and mindfulness, etc., and so on. But what you'll notice, especially in the early parts of the practice, there are parts of your mind that have different intentions, and those intentions are in conflict. And that's where it becomes really clear that if you allow it to, it doesn't become really clear to some people until much later on. But if you allow it to, it can become very clear in the first couple of, in stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 meditation, that, hey, these intentions that are arising, they don't belong to me. They're not part of a self as agency, but rather I have a variety of intentions in conflict with each other, and I'm trying to unify the disparate parts of my mind around these intentions. And yes, I still feel like there's an I that wants that to happen, that's generating that intention. But a little bit later, with kind of wisdom that comes with insight, even that disappears, and there's no longer even the illusion that, I mean, you still have to talk this way, right? You still have to talk in terms of I, me, and mine, and you'll still talk about, you know, my intention is, or my intention was, or things like this, because, you know, what you mean by I and me changes. What you mean is these 5 aggregates, this constantly changing process with a collection of mental processes has such and such intention, but it's much easier, much less clumsy to say my intention or I intended or something like that, but you see it and understand it as something completely different. Really, one of the points that I try to make in the overview, try to plant the seeds for and hope that they will mature, as the person continues through the practice of TMI, is to recognize that all there really is in terms of the source of actions, the source of thoughts and emotions and everything else, is intention. And these intentions are constructs that start at a very, very primitive level that is not accessible to us consciously at all, but that interact and accumulate until they reach the level of becoming conscious intentions, or even unconscious intentions that we can reflect upon and say, aha, I was not conscious of it, but there was some part of my mind that was pushing me in this direction. Now it's starting to sound very Freudian, isn't it? Well, that's one of the wonderful things that Freud brought to our understanding of our minds, is that there is this unconscious, that it is vast, that it is powerful, and that it actually has more control over what we do and what we perceive than our conscious mind does. And so Freud didn't get everything right, but he got certain things very, very accurately. And your behavior is the result of many complex intentions from many levels of your mind interacting. And the part of your mind that is generating your ego construct will incorporate those in. Now, your ego construct doesn't become dissolved in the sense that it ceases to exist, because all it ever was a way of organizing information that was functionally effective. And your mind will continue to organize information in a way that's functionally effective. But with the realization of no self, you know that that's what's happening. And you know that there isn't, even though you feel like a separate self, that doesn't change until in the higher paths of awakening. But you have this unshakable knowledge and understanding that my ego self, my idea of who I am, is a picture my mind is painting. It's taking my preferences and my experiences and my predispositions and those things that would be called my personality traits and so forth, and it's assembling them into a self. And then it attributes to self the experience of observation, when in fact in the seeing there is only the seeing. And it attributes to this created self the agency that results in not just actions, but at an unconscious level, our thoughts and our emotion. And it appropriates those into the self as our intentions. So how can something be used to dissolve the very thing out of which it arises? In the case of, the thing is, when you develop stable attention and mindfulness, and your mindfulness takes the form of powerful metacognitive introspective awareness, you see what's going on in your mind. You see it in such a way that it gives rise to insight. And as these insights come together, there's awakening from the dream that we live in, that things are in a particular way, to a much more accurate perception. So what has been dissolved in this process is the mistaken belief that we are separate selves in a world of separate objects, and that our happiness and our suffering are the result of our interaction between this separate self and this world of other separate entities. So that's what's dissolved. And in a sense, it is true that it is dissolved out of the very thing from which it arises. This is entirely a bootstrap affair. We start with where we are. We begin to meditate out of desire and out of aversion. We have desire for things that meditation promises, and we have aversion to things that are part of our life experience now. We have attachment to a self. we think what I would like this self to be awakened or enlightened. I would like this self to be free from suffering. But the thing is, no self ever becomes awakened because there's no self to be awakened. However, an awakened being in the construction of their ego self knows as some of their attributes that they the transparency, the illusory nature of the ego self itself in itself. So in a sense, we are pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps, and it is the very things. It's the very self-clinging, and it's the very craving that arises out of that self-clinging that actually brings us to spiritual practice. So isn't that a lovely paradox? And all along the way, as we gradually let go of these things, we're still using the remnants of them to motivate our behavior that will lead to the elimination of those very remnants. So fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, I had intended to quit at 12:30 and I've gone beyond that. John Monroe here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Well, they push the limits a little more since you're here.
Thank you
Great.
so much. It's such a pleasure to speak with you. I've seen your videos and been enjoying the book, but it's really nice to talk in person.
Yes, that's good to be here and good to have this opportunity. I'm glad to have you. So let's look at your question. You studied with Namgyal, and you enjoyed and were dazzled by the vast range of practices that he drew from traditions of every different kind. Yes, I felt the same way. The wonderful thing about what he did is that it opened our minds so that we were freed from the doctrinaire shackles of any one particular tradition. Now I'm determined to go narrow and deep rather than broad and shallow, and I'm diving into your approach with enthusiasm. Could you please speak to the relative benefits of the smorgasbord, practice it all, awaken along the way, versus the kaiseki or sushi bar, following one method all the way to awakening, then practice, learn the rest if interested, approach to awakening? Well, as I say, one of the greatest gifts that I feel like Namgyal gave us was to open us up. I mean, he was an ordained Theravadan monk who is actually regarded at a very high level in the spiritual hierarchy that defined the branch of Theravadan Buddhism that he was a part of. He was highly acknowledged in that. Yet he sought reordination in the Tibetan tradition and took the name Namgyal Rinpoche. He was recognized by the Karmapa as the Tulku of Namgyal. But then he proceeded to expand beyond it. His greatest gift to all of us who are connected to his lineage is the open-mindedness to look into other Buddhist traditions and to look everywhere. And had I not done that, I could not have succeeded in my practice the way I did, nor could I have written a book like TMI, nor would I be able to write the book that I'm currently working on, which is about the Dharma, and dealt with the meditation side of things. Now I'm going to try to bring the Dharma side of it into. As far as your question goes, I had a core path that I was following, while at the same time seeking in all kinds of other places for something that would help me understand it. And I think that what you will find, that if you follow any single path, that kind of narrowness, that I almost hate to say this, but it has happened just as the Buddha predicted. And especially after the Buddha Dharma turned into religion. I guess the term Buddhism really is it's a Western term that was coined during the colonial era to identify all of these people that appeared to be praying to a statue of some guy sitting with his legs crossed. There is no such thing as Buddhism, but what we have nowadays are a number of religions that have developed in different cultures out of Buddhism. And I make a clear distinction between Buddha Dharma and Buddhism. And Buddhism has lost important elements of Buddha Dharma, sometimes because of incorporating elements of other cultures and other traditions into the religion that is created out of the Buddha Dharma. So if you follow any particular tradition narrowly, then you are going to be subject to the gaps and the distortions, the corruption that has occurred. What is so wonderful about what is happening right now is we have the opportunity to look at all these different traditions and better see some of the gaps and distortions that have arisen in these different, as these different lineages have developed, with all their various trappings and their borrowings from other spiritual and religious traditions. I don't think that you would get very far playing the smorgasbord game, but if you played the smorgasbord game, yes, it is possible that awakening would occur somewhere along the way. The current, if you want to see what the smorgasbord game is like and see what the potential benefits are of borrowing from different traditions, I would highly recommend that you do Jeffrey Martin's a Finder's Course, because that's a true smorgasbord. But you've already, well, in your case, you've already been through Namgyal's smorgasbord, so you don't need to do that. What you've discovered is that a lot of the components, elements, experiences, states that are characteristic of insight and awakening can be experienced to a greater or lesser degree using a variety of different techniques, and some techniques are more effective than others, especially for some individuals as compared to others. But the advantage of staying with any single tradition to some degree is that you have the systematic development, which to me makes the Buddha Dharma superior to any other tradition, Buddhist or non-Buddhist. At the core, all of these different Buddhisms do still have that systematic, coherent Dharma that the Buddha taught. So if I were going to recommend anything is, follow TMI. What it is it's a synthesis. It's a framework. It's a framework to address the commonality of the way our minds can be developed, and the commonality of the goals that the different traditions are seeking. And it is at this moment, and of course I would believe this, but at this moment what I believe is the clearest organized systematic path for one to follow. And while following that path, there's absolutely nothing wrong with experimenting with other things. I recommend to my student teachers that when they reach a certain stage in their practice, they go and do some retreats in a Mahasi style or Goenka style, or they follow the teachings of an Advaita Vedanta teacher, somebody that's teaching non-duality. Go spend a weekend or a week with Adyashanti and things like that, because this will help to flesh out some aspects. You know, first of all, there's a limit to how much I as one person could assimilate. And secondly, there's a limit to how much of what I've assimilated that I could express in a single book. In that way, I feel a little bit like, you know, the Buddha when he was saying, what I've taught you is like the dirt under my fingernails. What I've learned is like the earth that we stand on. I wouldn't want to I wouldn't want to sound so proud as to put myself on the same level as the Buddha in that regard. But yeah, I learned a lot more than I was could accumulate, or I could transmit to you in a book like The Mind Illuminated. I probably have to write 20 books to do that. But by all means, it is worthwhile to explore the methods of other traditions and use the 10 stages in TMI as the framework by which you can understand it. Have a number of student teachers with a strong background in the Mahasi tradition. And what they say is, had I read this book or had I known these things, I would have made so much more progress, so much more quickly in the Mahasi tradition. But the other thing is they understand what that particular practice is trying to do, because it fits into the framework of the 10 stages and the skill development and the arising of metacognitive introspective awareness that allows you to see the rising and passing away and ultimately dissolution of things. Yeah, so did I answer your question?
Yeah, very much so. Thanks so much.
All right, you're welcome.
Yeah.
And gone way over time, but I succeeded in answering the questions of everybody that was here and a number of questions of people that weren't able to make it today. So I thank you all for coming, and I hope you found this valuable and useful. So, look forward to next time.
Thank you so much.
Should you and I talk now, Culadasa?
Sure,
Or
yes,
not
we
a good
can.
time? Oh, okay, so maybe turn off the recording, Ted.
Yeah.
Ted, you can stay on the line.
I was going to say I'm going to take off unless you think I should stay, but.
Oh,